Stop.
Hello everybody and welcome back. It is June 28th, 2021 and you're listening to episode 118 of the Can I Say Something podcast. Your host and a recluse with a juicy caboose, Damien. Joining me today is
Derick McDuff.
Right into the show, bicycle@gmail.com, bicycle on Twitter, subscribe to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, rate and review at Apple Podcast. Tell a friend, family member, or stranger. What's up, man? How you doing?
Doing well, man. It's good to be back on the show. I had a lot of fun last time, and excited to be back and talking about Fincher in 1999 and all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah. First time, two-time guest. So you're two guest spots into three away from Alec Baldwin's five-timer list on SNL. So three more to go.
Okay, all right. Rarefied air.
Exactly. So yeah, like you said, today we'll be discussing David Fincher's films, our top 5 list of his stuff. But first, we're going to do a little bit of what we've been watching. So just last couple of weeks, I know you said you listened to my podcast the last couple of weeks, but do you want to go into a little bit of what you've been watching the last couple of weeks?
Yeah. I mean, I have been watching Loki, but I know you've been talking about that a lot on your show, so I won't go too much into it. I've also been, speaking of Marvel, I finally have gotten around to watching Legion, the David Haller X-Men show from a couple years back, and just started season 2 right now. That I am really enjoying. It's very trippy, kind of reminiscent of, or I guess WandaVision is reminiscent of it. It's really, I can't recommend it enough. So I've been really enjoying that. I actually also got back to the theater for the first time, like an actual going out to seeing a movie in a theater.
Wow. Nice.
Since everything happened. And I saw Cruella, and it was not very good.
No, it's unfortunate.
I mean, there was definitely things to like in it, like it was incredible performances across the board from Emma Stone and Emma Thompson, and all the supporting cast was incredible. There's some pretty cool set pieces, and the costume design is just amazing. But it is, I do, when I saw it announced, I was like, okay, well, they're just going to take this horrible dog murderer and try to make her sympathetic and just kind of like be like, oh, this is the same thing they did in Maleficent, where they give her a tragic backstory and kind of make her want to be likable and stuff, and then just like, oh, she's actually not the same horrible Cruella that you saw in the other movie. This one, she's still kind of a little mean, so you can wear her Hot Topic line, but she's actually kind of a good person. And just it has one of the worst scenes in a movie that I think I've ever seen in my life. I won't spoil it, but I could not believe what I was watching when I saw this scene, and it ties into that. They were like, what? It was like a Saturday Night Live sketch about if you were going to make a tragic backstory for Cruella de Vil, that's what they would do on Saturday Night Live, and they actually put it in the movie.
Jesus, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the origin story of how...
Yeah.
Is it her mother, right? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
I don't know, should we say...
Yes, yeah, spoiler alert for the first 10 minutes of Cruella, which is, I think I saw it on Twitter, but yeah, the Dalmatians, right, they murder her mother.
Dalmatians push her mother off of a cliff to a watery grave. It is insane.
Jesus Christ.
And it is played completely straight. Because there's other things in the movie that are like, wink, wink, this is kind of funny, and it's kind of silly, but like that is played like completely straight, and it's just like, it was just like, I imagine the pitch meeting Disney being like, how can we make a literal dog murderer sympathetic? Well, what if the Dalmatians pushed her mother off a cliff? Here's $100 million, go make it.
Go make it, yeah. So what is the context for that? Was it her Dalmatians? Was it her neighbor's Dalmatians got out? What happened there?
So she's at like a, her mother is going to Emma Thompson's house to basically ask her for money, and Cruella kind of lets the Dalmatians out, so she's like, "Oh, it was my fault. The Dalmatians murdered my mother." And the Dalmatians like run across the party and end up running outside, and they push her mom off the cliff into this ocean. And then there's a twist later on that has to do with it, and I won't say too much about that because that doesn't happen in the back half of the movie. It's not a huge. You can probably see it coming, but it's really just like really lazy screenwriting.
Yeah, I've heard people, different variations on it. I'm not sure what it has on Rotten Tomatoes, but I've heard, it's not great, but it's fine for what it is, for the origin story of a villain, going into it, not expecting much. It was fine for what it was, but yeah.
I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more had it been a tighter movie. It's like over 2 hours long, and I'm like, this is too long for what this is. It's kind of fun, but it needs to be a little more brief, and I really don't like the trend of just like, now the Disney villain is actually cool, like they're not a horrible person. I didn't like either of the Maleficent films. There are some of the live action Disney remakes that I do like a lot, and I love Emma Stone. That was really my only reason for wanting to go see the movie, is because I'm a really big fan of hers. But this movie, it's not horrible. I think that if it was a different cast, it would have just fallen apart. But because it is so many strong actors and actresses, I do think that it holds it up to be from what would be a awful film to a mediocre film.
Yeah. I'll probably skip it. Like you said, the acting is, the actors and their what they're bringing to the table pretty much supports the film overall, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So what else you been watching?
So like I mentioned, Legion was pretty good. I'm actually been a lot of my free time recently. I've been doing a lot of playing a lot of video games, which is something I used to do a lot, but kind of fell off of. But I got finally Breath of the Wild, so
Nice.
I've been playing that like nonstop. But Breath of the Wild, and then I actually have gone back and I've seen it a couple times before, but it's one of my favorite shows. I'm rewatching Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
Oh, nice.
Which is just it's incredible. Like, I'm not a huge anime guy. Like, I do enjoy anime, but it's not like, one of my go-to genres. But holy shit, like, this show, it just delivers on everything. Like when I originally watched it, I just became obsessed with it. You really are so invested in the characters and the plots, and it's philosophical, and it really talks about like the nature of good and evil, and like, how we need to treat other people, and how our actions impact the world, and just it's so deep on so many levels. And it's just a really cool action like show. It's a great show of anime where it's just like, it's got a guy who's got a metal arm, then he can do like basically magic where he can like make things transmute into other things. And have you seen it? I know I'm just kind of going off on here.
I have seen it. I love it.
Okay, excellent. I'm glad. I'm glad that I'm preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely one of my favorite shows of all time. And every once in a while, I'll go back and give it a binge. And I'm in the middle of another binge right now.
So I was gonna say the big sort of reveal, I guess, right, of what the doctor is doing to his daughter with the chimera experiments and all that. That was just Edward. Oh God, Jesus.
Big brother, Edward.
Big brother.
Oh my God, it still gets me.
It really does.
Like every time I see like a meme or something, I'm like, oh, too soon.
Yeah. So you mentioned playing Breath of the Wild. I was actually playing a game before we jumped on. I don't know if you played any roguelike deck builders before, like Slay the Spire or anything like that.
I can't say that I have, no.
So it's kind of hard to explain if you've never played them before, but it's basically a game where you can go through it over and over and over again and kind of have different runs, sort of like Metroid-ish, but so you go through and it's you have two different routes you can take. It's a map, and it shows you two different routes you can take. One route might have merchants you can buy stuff from. It can have health potions. It can have it'll show you where all the enemies are basically, and you can choose which direction to take. And during the battles, you have basic cards of like attack, defend, draw a card, whatever. But then later on, the cards will get more advanced, such as like take 5 damage, draw 5 cards, deal 5 damage. It'll be this giant like Magic the Gathering style cards. And so I'm playing this new one called Roguelike or Rogue Book, which so you're in a book, you're in this designed book, this drawn out book, this painted book. It looks like a old timey like cartoon looking world, like very much like Wes Anderson looking. And so it'll show you this route. You can go up the middle, and you have one bad guy in the middle, and on the left and the right there's fields of hidden nodes. And so your job is to take a brush and expose those nodes and see what's there. So what's there could be money to go back to the merchant to buy better upgrades for your cards. It can be bad guys. It could be new cards. You pay 25 gold to get a new card to fill out your deck. And the deck building aspect of it is basically, let's say you get a card that'll do poison. So then from then on, you want to build your deck around poison. So like something that will double the poison that's on a creature, or something that will, when a creature dies, whatever poison is on that creature will then transfer to the other creatures evenly. So it's stuff like that. It's very, very cool. But it's called Rogue Book.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's called.
Because I play like some deck building board games. So they're obviously not that the scope is smaller. But the same basic idea definitely holds, where you get a card and you kind of try to build your cards around these different decks. So I do love those deck building games, stuff like Wingspan or Dominion. So yeah, that's but with it kind of being in a video game like that, where there's also, it sounds like kind of an exploring element, sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I loved it a lot. So yeah, basically, we were both watching Loki, right? I don't want to dive too deep into it because we'll be here forever. But the last episode, so spoilers for Loki episode 3, was it? I think they're up to
three.
Episode 3 now. So what do you think? So they're this is the situation they're in is the planet's dying. Loki transferred himself and Lady Loki to a planet that's going to be crashed into another planet, and they have to get out of there before that happens. And at the end of the episode, they leave you with the impression that they're screwed, that the ship that they were trying to get on was destroyed by an incoming asteroid, and that's where they left them. So how do you see them getting out of that situation?
Well, I was just like, I remember I was watching, I was like, this is like, what is this? Like, what's going to happen? Like, what possibly could they do to get out of this? I have no idea. It's like, I always call that the Kobayashi Maru, from Star Trek, the no-win situation. And I hope they don't do this, but the only thing that I can think of is Owen Wilson shows up at the last minute and snatches them away. But because I really hope that it's something that they have some kind of ingenuity, they come up with some plan, between the two Lokis, these two mischievous trickster, like master planners come up with something to get out of it. But I don't know what that would be, so that's why if I was like, the only thing that I could think of, is an outside, somebody else comes and scoops them and grabs them away. But I hope they can come up with something on their own, just between the two of them, to kind of, change history and get off the planet and do something. I think it will be something that catches a lot of people off guard.
Yeah, you mentioned Kobayashi Maru, like they're stuck in this no-win situation. The other thing that I like about the show, but also am worried about, is that they could bring in any Deus Ex Machina of like, Loki didn't really destroy the transporter, whatever it's called, Tempad. He didn't really destroy it. That was his little sleight of hand trick. He actually does still have one working. They could bring in pretty much anything. Like the whole thing could be a dream. Like she could be Lady Loki actually did get into his brain when he pretended not to. He pretended it didn't happen. That from that point on, everything could have been a hallucination. I don't really want them to go down that road, but that is obviously anything's possible. So yeah, like I said, anything's possible in this show.
Yeah, and two minor things I want to touch on. Well, I don't know how minor they are, but two things I want to touch on from the show was I love the callback to the original first Thor, when he smashes the cup and says another. Like, I thought that was great, because that's one of my favorite moments from early Marvel. Like, and just in general, I love that. It's something I make a reference to all the time with my friends. And also just really cool that they were like, oh yeah, like this is something everybody suspected for a while, but yeah, Loki's bisexual. Like, which is really cool to have, like, not some like side character or like minor character, but an actual like major hero, or not hero, but a major character
Yep.
who has his own show in the MCU, be LGBTQ, which
Yep.
is pretty cool. I mean, it is kind of suck that they're like, we got to do this on a TV show,
Yeah.
because they're not worried about the money from China.
Yeah.
So I wish that Marvel would have a little more guts and have somebody in the movie, like in a movie, come out. But it is still progress, and that's really cool because it's something that it's like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense for Loki to come out as bi. So I'm glad that it's kind of finally happened.
Yeah. Yeah, Loki in the original, I'm not familiar at all with Norse mythology, like the origins of it, but I heard that, in his original like canon of the Loki character in Norse mythology was this just omnisexual,
Oh
like
yeah.
apparently he was a horse dude that fucked another
Yeah.
horse and they had a horse
Yeah.
baby.
He's kind of like how Zeus would just like fuck anything,
Yeah.
like include he would just turn like somebody had a thing for swans, so they would turn into a swan. Like it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Like he fathered this like mythic, like he fathered all these like crazy monsters, like
Yeah.
and this like this horse this like 8-legged horse and all this, because me and my friend who are like Alan from my podcast, we're both really into like mythology, and we were just kind of like joking around like, oh, like everybody's like homophobes are mad that like Loki's bi. Well, just don't let them read like Norse mythology with him fucking horses and all this stuff.
Yeah, they really need to again lean into that stuff. That's really great that they're finally doing that. Like, not just saying like later on, oh, that person in that meeting in Endgame, one of the Russos played a gay character, and it's just like, yeah, afterwards they sort of mention it offhandedly, but yeah, really good that they're diving into it deeply right there.
Yeah, because they did actually shoot a scene that in Thor Ragnarok that confirmed that Valkyrie was bi. That got cut. That like people were pretty upset about, rightly so.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yep. So let me just mention a few things I've been watching this week. Riders of Justice, this movie directed by Anders Thomas Jensen, starring Mads Mikkelsen. It's very much one of those, ex-special forces guy. Wife gets killed and he has to, go on a revenge killing spree. But I think it's one of those, but it does that, sort of trope genre really, really well. A lot of humor, a lot of like really well shot action set pieces, a lot of really grounded and gritty moments where at one point the bad guys sort of find them, the house gets shot up that they're hiding out in, but people actually take damage. There's not like 1,000 bullets flying everywhere and nobody gets hit. People actually do take shrapnel damage, and it's actually very grounded and realistic take on one of those movies. Yeah, so that's Riders of Justice. I think that's on premium VOD right now on Amazon. And then I checked out Luca, the new Pixar film that came out a couple weeks ago. It's on Disney Plus, but it's actually streaming for free, so that's cool.
Yeah, how was that? Because that's I've been meaning to watch that. I just haven't had time. So like, would you recommend that?
Absolutely. It is. I said last week it is. There is like two types of Pixar movies, right? There's the ones geared towards adults that children can also enjoy, like Inside Out and Up. Ratatouille sort of goes in the line, straddles the line between the two. Definitely Soul was definitely more for adults, but Luca is one of those that is for kids, but also adults can enjoy very much so.
Okay, so it's like Cars and The Good Dinosaur, that kind of category.
Yeah, I would put it more closely aligned with like what was like a ones for like just kids that like Toy Story, I guess, sort of.
Okay. I get
yeah, somewhere in there. Finding Nemo, I think, would be more applicable to that sort of thing. Yeah, it is very good. It is small, grounded storytelling. Very a lot of parallels to like the Miyazaki films. Very small, very intimate, low stakes. Sort of like My Neighbor Totoro, that sort of thing, but very, very good. Very good story about childhood friendship and things like that. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. Yeah, so I think that's about all I've been watching this past couple of weeks. I did check out a couple things on Criterion, California Split, a Robert Altman film from 1974 with Elliot Gould and George Siegel, which is very good. I enjoyed that very much. So yeah, bunch of stuff I've been watching. So with that, why don't we get to top 5 David Fincher films? Because I also have a pretty big lead in to this topic. I listened to Best Movie Year Ever by Brian Rafferty. It's a book that I believe came out on the 20th anniversary of 1999, came out 2019. Finally listened to it last night. It is fascinating. It is really, I am so deeply fascinated by by movie making, by the process of it, by the logistics of it, the economy of trying to sell an idea to a studio, and just being like, yeah, it's this movie where John Malkovich, and people go into his head, and there's this doll designer, he's played by John Cusack, and the studio's like, what the fuck? What are you even talking about? What is that? Fight Club was a hard sell. So many movies from 1999. I'm gonna rattle off a few, and just stop me or interject anytime. Biggest movies of that year. I don't know if you're aware of this list and the sort of amount of movies that came out that year.
Oh yeah. It's so interesting because when we were kind of talking about this beforehand, you said you're reading a book about 99. I was like, oh, that's got to be best movie year ever because I work at the bookstore, and so I see that all the time. I'm like, I got to read that at some point. It's definitely on my list of things to read. But yeah, that is definitely up there for one of the best years in film.
It really is. Look, just the biggest. So I have them sort of categorized. Biggest movies that came out that year: Star Wars Episode 1, Phantom Menace, Blair Witch Project, The Matrix, The Mummy, Office Space, Sixth Sense, Fight Club, Austin Powers 2, Green Mile, American Beauty, American Pie, South Park, Cruel Intentions, Magnolia, Analyze This, Toy Story 2, Big Daddy, Talented Mr. Ripley, Galaxy Quest, Never Been Kissed, Stuart Little, Deep Blue Sea, Notting Hill, Wild Wild West, and Entrapment, and The World Is Not Enough, Eyes Wide Shut. And then you have sort of the smaller indie films like Idle Hands. Have you seen Idle Hands, by the way?
No, I haven't.
It is a really great, like, late 90s, early 2000s, like Seth Green's in it, so you know right off the bat what kind of horror movie it is. It's about, has Devon Sawa in it. His hand gets possessed by a demon, and he has to cut it off, and then the rest of the movie is them trying to catch the hand.
Okay, I know. Okay, like when you said his hand gets possessed and he cuts it off, I'm like, I know exactly what movie you're talking about. Like, it's one of those movies I feel like I've seen like flipping channels late at night and like watch like 5 minutes of like, this is interesting, and then you just go back to whatever.
Yeah, it's crazy. Run Lola Run was amazing. Audition for the foreign stuff. Dogma, Broke Down Palace, Boys Don't Cry, Pushing Tin, But I'm a Cheerleader, Boondock Saints, Mystery Men, The Limey, Being John Malkovich, 8mm, Election, The Virgin Suicides, Girl Interrupted, Rushmore, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. You had kids movies, The Iron Giant and Tarzan. Teen movies, Varsity Blues, 10 Things I Hate About You, She's All That, Go, Jawbreaker. Then you have 99 was actually a really good year for filmmakers' first movies or their breakout movie. You had 3 black and white indies: Christopher Nolan's first movie, Following; Darren Aronofsky's first movie, Pi. And then just others rounding out the list. You have Bringing Out the Dead, Any Given Sunday, Bone Collector, Double Jeopardy, Sleepy Hollow, The Thomas Crown Affair, Stigmata, For Love of the Game, Summer of Sam, Lake Placid, October Sky, Three Kings, which I love very much, Ed TV, Forces of Nature, The Insider, Michael Mann's Insider, Man on the Moon, and The Thin Red Line, the first movie in 20 years directed by Terrence Malick. So incredible. One of the best years ever. And I think it's one of those things where you just, think about it. Yeah, okay, a couple things came out, but then you just present a list like that. It's incredible. Yeah. It's incredible.
No, like there's a lot there, like, and not, it's a lot of different genres too. Like it's like you could just, like say, okay, what genre? Like, and somebody's like, okay, animation. You're like, okay, well, Toy Story 2. Then you said like Iron Giant and Tarzan. Like just right off the bat, 3 classics.
Yep. Yes. Yep. Just incredible. And just talking about Fincher's generation. Go back to the top 5 Fincher stuff. Of his generation, where would you rank him? Because we have a couple guys here: Tarantino, Paul Thomas Anderson, David O. Russell, Steven Soderbergh. Where would you rank him among his peers of his generation?
He's definitely up there at the top. Because I was looking at your list, and I think a lot of those guys are people I respect a lot. I would add to that list of people. I would say Nolan. I would add to the list as well.
Nolan,
But because it's hard because a lot of them are very different filmmakers. Like, how do you compare a Guillermo del Toro to Kevin Smith? I mean, I do think del Toro is clearly a better filmmaker than Smith.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
But they're just hard to compare. But I would say he's definitely at least top 3 for me. Soderbergh is up there for me for sure. Also. I love Steven Soderbergh, and Paul Thomas Anderson too.
Yeah.
And I gotta say Del Toro has got to be up there.
Yep.
So it's hard because they're all really good. Fincher might be one, honestly, because I don't think he's had a miss. Like, I like all of his films.
Yeah.
There's even Soderbergh, there's like one or two that aren't like like the top of the Wes
Yeah.
Anderson's great, but he's kind of very quirky, and you kind of have to be in a mood to watch a Wes Anderson
Right.
film.
Right.
And while Fincher does kind of have a reputation of being like this darker filmmaker, he does have things that are like The Curious Case of Benjamin Button that are not that. So I think he does. Yeah. I think he's got to be kind of the top of the mountain of this kind of new class, the guys that kind of came after that new Hollywood. There was the guys in the 70s. Your George Lucases and your Spielbergs and your Coppolas and all those guys, and this kind of batch directly following them, kind of took what they had done and kind of built on it and expanded upon it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. And you're talking about basically the consistencies of their filmography. So Soderbergh is one of these guys that you mentioned that, puts out a lot of stuff. I think he in the last 3 years or even 2 years have put out like 5 different things. Very weird stuff.
Yeah.
Very interesting filmmaker. But yeah, I guess, I would agree with you definitely with the consistency of his films. Like you go back, he started off really rough with Alien 3. A lot of studio interference on that, which they mentioned in the book, Best Movie Year Ever. But I just the consistency of his films going through his filmography, you just it holds up, I think, better than Paul Thomas Anderson had. Magnolia in '99, and then he did Punch Drunk Love in 2002. Took 5 years to make another one, which was There Will Be Blood in 2007. I guess you look at a lot of these guys' filmography, especially David O. Russell. I'm not sure if he's even made he made Joy, I think, in 2015, but I haven't really heard anything.
Yeah, I think
since
that's the
then.
last movie that he did.
Yeah. So just again, I think number 1 or number 2, I really like Paul Thomas Anderson stuff. Probably put him near second. I'm a sucker for Wes Anderson's quirksicle. Have you ever heard that phrase, quirksicle?
Yeah.
Describing it's like what is it, a mix of quirky and whimsical, right? Yeah, very very much that. And again, Danny Boyle did he do the Steve Jobs, right? He wrote that, I believe, or.
Yeah, Boyle is interesting because Boyle is one of those guys. I think he is as good as his writer. Like, I think that directors rightly get a lot of credit, whereas directors get a lot of credit, whereas the writers don't get a lot of credit. And I think a lot of Danny Boyle's best films are films that are written by, usually Alex Garland, like his movie Sunshine, or like his movie 28 Days Later. They're I think they're both by Alex Garland, I want to say.
They are. Yep.
But I think, and then he does some movies that are kind of middling. I didn't see Steve Jobs, but he did like that Beatles movie, and he does a lot of stuff that's just okay. Like, I think he's like Slumdog Millionaire is a movie that I think is entertaining enough, but it hasn't aged well. It's one of those like, oh yeah, that one Best Picture. Like, that was, they kind of didn't know what they were doing that year. Things, in hindsight are just, like, who's going back to watch Slumdog Millionaire? Like it's not like Fight Club or something where you're going to go back and watch it. So I do think he's a talented director, but he kind of needs to be working with a good screenwriter to kind of be on that next level with the rest of these guys.
Yeah, exactly. I saw yesterday, that came out 2000 or about 2 years ago. One of the most disappointing movies I saw that year. Yeah, exactly. The consistency just isn't there, just like Fincher has it. I think he did Mank last year, which I enjoyed quite a bit.
Yeah, I did like Mank. I think it might have been, other than Alien 3, which, obviously, like you said, it had a lot of studio interference. So there was all this stuff. That's kind of why he's been so independent of the studios and done his own thing, is because of his experiences on Alien 3. But I think Mank might have been my least favorite Fincher film other than that. Still, though, phenomenal. That's why I think he's maybe my top director of this class, is because even when he makes a movie that I don't like as much as the rest of his films, it's still like a great film that I absolutely loved.
Yeah, very, very high floor Just like I was saying,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it was, a couple weeks ago, but certain like MCU has a very high floor. There's a very high floor with David Fincher stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
So what was the first Fincher film you saw, and where did you see it?
So the first Fincher film that I saw was Seven, which I was like, oh wow! Like saw it I know I was in high school, and I was just like, wow, this twisty detective story, because you see so many detective stories that are just kind of like, oh okay, like point A to B, and if there's a twist, it's kind of just it either comes out of nowhere or like it doesn't make sense, and it's like, why was he acting scared when he was the only person that but this was like a different kind of detective movie for me. I was like, holy shit, like it's really intense, and it's pretty graphic, but you like are very invested in the characters, and it's playing on a lot of these kind of like tropes, like the old guy who just wants to retire and there's the new kid, but it tweaks them so that it kind of messes with your expectations. And I'm really fascinated by like the concept of the seven deadly sins, and all the performances are great. So I was just like, oh wow, this is that was before I even really knew directors. I was invested in. I don't even remember like what context I saw it in, but I remember, strangely enough, we watched it in my English class like later on in like my senior or junior year, and I had seen it already. And I was like, oh yeah, guys, this is a great movie. It's got a great ending. Like I was really excited to watch it with my friends. But yeah, that was definitely the first one I had seen was Seven, and it really kind of, as I saw more and more of his stuff, and I realized it was all directed by the same guy, I was like, wow, there's something here.
Yeah, I believe as far as like seeing the movie that I saw first was probably Seven as well. That was such a mindfuck for me in a lot of ways. My dad showed me a lot of horror movies when I was like 8 or 9, which probably fucked me up for a while, of like it's just the Nightmare on Elm Street and Jason movies. And then I probably saw this on cable and was just like, what the fuck? It took me a long time to even recognize that I forget the guy's name. He's a character actor, but he was the one that basically was forced to fuck the stripper to death with the knife dildo.
Oh
right?
yeah, the guy. He's like being punished for being.
Yeah.
Oh, the stripper's lust, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
And I was just like, what the hell is even happening? So the first Fincher movie I specifically remember seeing was on DVD. Probably one of the first DVDs I bought was Fight Club, and it came in this weird like paper wrapping. It had a case on it that made it look like it was wrapped in like newspaper or whatever. And so we watched it with a bunch of my friends, and we're just like, we were into like a lot of karate at that point. So my friends were like, this isn't karate. This is like guys punching themselves. And I'm like, hold on. Just watch. And that was one of the first two. Again, let me just put it out there that all these movies are going to be spoiling, deeply all of Fincher's movies in this podcast. But it takes you a while to wrap your head around the fact that Marla, when she's talking with Jack, I guess we'll call him, or the narrator, right? There's that specific part that I always go back to, think about, but not realizing the impact that it had on Marla when he's out. There's like, Project Mayhem is in full swing. The paper house company's house is in full swing. They got all the monkeys doing the yard work, right? And she comes in and she's like, "Where's Tyler?" And Jack goes, "Tyler's not here. Tyler went away." And she's just staring at him like, what the fuck is going on? I'm going to walk away before you skin me to death. Bye. And it's just such a mind fuck going back and not just realizing that, I say this all the time to people. Like, you think about the first person that he meets in that movie, right? And he's punching himself, right? Jack is punching himself outside of a bar, and people are watching this. And one guy goes, "Hey, I got next." What do you have next to? You're gonna wrestle a guy punching himself in the face? Really? Like, what the fuck kind of a person do you have to be to like want to tangle with that shit? You know what I mean?
No, I absolutely love movies like that when when you watch them a second time with some added context. You're like, hold on. That makes a lot more. Oh man, that's weird when you think about in Fight Club, like The Prestige or like Fight Club, and some of Fincher's other stuff definitely has, when you find out the twist, you're like, oh shit, so that's, oh man.
Yeah. Jesus. Yeah. So talking about Fight Club specifically, when you go back and watch it now as like an older person, do the themes of like masculinity and capitalism, consumerism, did you latch onto them when you first saw them? Do you appreciate them more now as you're getting older?
Well, because I didn't see it until I was, I think, in college, like maybe freshman year of college. So
Yeah.
like I wasn't super young. I was definitely like after it had been out for like a while, and I had kind of had it lightly spoiled for me. Like I didn't know the exact. I knew that like somebody was imagined. I didn't know like if it was Ed Norton or Tyler Durden or what was going on. But I was like, okay, so I kind of like knew some stuff going in, but
Yeah.
all the themes about like masculinity and kind of like the corporate, like how there's a Starbucks in every shot and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
like I think that like yeah, definitely as I've gotten older, it's something I really appreciate a lot more. It's something that in college I was kind of like starting to be like, okay, like like there's a lot of toxic masculinity in the world, and like
Oh yeah.
corporations are not great, and it's something that
Yep.
as I've gotten older have come to appreciate more in my own life. So I do appreciate it in the movie as well, but I do think I watched it kind of like right at the kind of like point in my life when I was starting to wake up to those kind of things, being in college. So yeah, it's interesting because like I feel like a lot of the people who like idolize this film do it
Yeah.
for the exact wrong reasons.
Exactly.
They see like oh this is Fight Club and Project Mayhem and all the toxic masculinity and consumer culture that it is criticizing. They are like glom onto, and they're like, yeah, Tyler Durden is the best. And it's like, no, you're not supposed to
Yeah. No.
relate to this guy. He's kind of a monster.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah, especially the term, you are not a special or unique snowflake. The term snowflake is thrown around now to mean like you're, just a hippie liberal. So yeah, a lot of the themes and a lot of the messages of the movie has been completely, twisted and contorted and just lost on so many people. Exactly.
Yeah, it's like the whole like how the like the deep right internet has like co-opted the term red pill to be like,
Exactly.
oh yeah, like,
Exactly.
and I'm like, okay, that's a term from a movie, speaking of 1999, that is directed by two trans women. Like,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
come on, guy. Like, I don't know, just, it's amazing how just, like, people can just miss the entire point of a movie. Because I do think Fight Club is pretty subtle about some of its
Yeah.
themes. So,
Yeah.
and I don't think that that you should really hammer somebody over the head with the themes like this, because then it becomes
Right.
preachy. But then
Right.
you do, run the risk of like people totally misinterpreting it.
Yeah, exactly. There's one thing I just want to quickly mention about, the year overall, like you said, the red pilling and the toxic masculinity of a lot of these movies. The trench coat and the Matrix and obviously inspired the Columbine shootings, and I don't think it can be overstated how much of the influence of Columbine had on Fight Club, had on Matrix. Obviously, so many movies that came out that year that had any tinge of violence or shooting, anything was heavily what the studios wanted to cut out so much of that, or even just delay a lot of these movies from that year. So a lot of the Columbine was huge, had a huge cast a huge cloud over a lot of the movies of that year. So
Yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of these movies are about like angry white dudes, like waking up, like
Yes.
white dudes working in like their corporate offices, like stuff like The Matrix or Fight Club or Office Space, and just kind of
Yep.
like being fed up, and
Yep.
people can definitely take the wrong messages from that.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see here. Oh, I just want to mention real quick the DVD system of just like features and Easter eggs in the menu system of Fight Club was incredible. I've watched this movie so many times, and a lot of times I would just like be like, let me just look at that one Easter egg, and I end up watching the whole movie again. So that's something I truly miss about DVDs and Blu-rays. Criterion Collection has some of that. I watched a movie the other night with the director commentary on, because they actually do have that version in their service there. So that's pretty cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Criterion, they always have really cool special features. If like I can pick up a Criterion movie, I try to. Like we have a sale that we do at, at my store. We're at Barnes and Noble, and we do Criterion half off sales twice a year, and there's one coming up. So I'm gonna probably pick up a bunch of different stuff when
Nice.
that takes place.
Nice. That's awesome. I grabbed. It wasn't on sale, but the Wong Kar-wai collection that just came out from Criterion. I got that a few months ago, so I've been digging into that a little bit. Yep. So last couple things. Fincher's obviously an art tour director. I have it as a question, but I don't think it's a. He is that.
Well, I think that it does get kind of questioned, because I was thinking about, because you phrased it to question. I was like, well, I think obvious to me that he is, and I think the reason it gets questioned is because of his background in music videos, and like he came from the same kind of school as Michael Bay, who obviously went a very different route. And that's why like I was watching something about him and kind of his background, and how a couple years back, they did a bunch of film directors who directed music videos, and they're kind of like our tour directors, and you had Spike Jonze and his Beastie Boys videos and stuff like that in there, but none of Fincher's music videos were in there. I think because he's kind of more like, even his music videos were very like poppy and just kind of like Madonna and Vogue and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they, and so I think that's why he does kind of get, he's got to do a Mank to get respected,
Yeah, no, they definitely have, I don't know what his reputation as far as like how he treats people behind the scenes, but it definitely does have that, you look at a David Fincher movie or even a still, and it's like, yeah, that's definitely a Fincher movie. The sort of grainy, gritty, sort of greenish brown filter on a lot of the stuff, a lot of the early stuff, The Game, Fight Club, Seven, a lot of that had that dark, gritty look to it. Even the later stuff, sort of like Social Network and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, has just this like, dreary, wet, greasy look to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
totally
definitely
know what you're saying.
Yeah, I definitely put him in that auteur category. And then finally,
for sure.
Just finally talking about him in general. Great music. Dust Brothers did the soundtrack and the score for Fight Club. I just love putting on that first like ramping up. Like montage of the credits, fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And then later on, he works with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross on Social Network, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and Gone Girl. The end of Fight Club, where the Pixies' "Where's My Mind" comes on. That was my first introduction to the Pixies, or any really alternative music in general. Like that put me down a deep, deep hole in like 99, 2000 of going. I was starting with Pixies and going to Nirvana and grunge music and more alternative stuff. Really huge influence on my my music, exploration around that time.
Yeah, no, it really, like, I do love, that is a great kind of like needle drop to end the movie. One of the best needle drops in, film for sure. And he has a lot of like great kind of like, pop songs that are inserted into his different movies, like, and I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head, but nothing comes to mind. But like, I know it's something that he is, very good at, and it's probably because he has this kind of background with working with like pop and alternative music, and I definitely got into like kind of alternative rock at roughly that same time, maybe a little bit later, because of movies, when they were starting to put in all these like great alt rock groups like the Killers and whoever into the Pixies, like you had mentioned, into films. And I think that really kind of helped kind of create the genre and the sound of the kind of early to mid 2000s.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. That the beginning of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the Karen O cover of Immigrant Song, fucking incredible.
So good.
It's so good, man. So why don't you kick us off? What is your number 5 David Fincher film?
All right. So number 5 is for me is going to be Gone Girl. Really, is really really good. Like we were kind of talking about how Fincher is good with his kind of mystery detective. Like what's going to happen? We go back and rewatch it. Things make sense in a lot different ways. And I think Gone Girl is just kind of like a quintessential pure example of all of that. You don't really like either of the main characters, and you can watch it and kind of sort of sympathize with either of them, but also kind of really hate both of them at the same time. It asks a lot of really big, interesting questions that it doesn't necessarily give the answers to, and it's also just like a really tight, interesting narrative mystery that kind of keeps you guessing, where it walks that fine line of like when the things are revealed to you, you might guess it, but it's not obvious, and so it doesn't feel like a cop out when the twists happen. Who said we're spoiling it? When you find out that Amy is alive and like her whole second half of the movie and all the things that she's been doing, it all makes sense. It doesn't feel like you've been lied to earlier on in the film, even when it does show some stuff from her perspective, because it is her journals and she did specifically create those to kind of be a lie. And I'll probably get more into this, with his other films, but I do think it is a really interestingly structured film where it does kind of switch back and forth between essentially two main characters and two point of view characters, while also having a lot of, they're both terrible, so it does have some, good, kind of supporting characters for you to latch on to, his sister played by Carrie Coon, or, the detective played by Kim Wiggins. A lot of those characters you can kind of latch on to and, be kind of ground you a little bit in getting through this rather dark, unforgiving film that is kind of at the end is just like, yeah, you know what? Actually, like, it makes you like question the media and like how things are portrayed, and it's like, does Ben Affleck's character Nick actually deserve this? Does Amy deserve this? Are either of them bad? And just like how we're all kind of performative in our own lives at some point to any degree, like even with our most like intimate, close people, like no one can ever 100% be yourself, and even something like this, we're on a podcast and we're pretty conversational and stuff like that, but you kind of do always put on a persona, like I might be talking different on this podcast than I would necessarily if I was talking with Gone Girls, like somebody on the street, like talk to my friend over here, or like somebody at work over here. Not gonna always exactly be the same, and and just the way that media narratives can just twist everything. Obviously, it's based on a book. The author, she used to work for Entertainment Weekly, so she, knows the whole aspect of kind of just the twisted entertainment industry. So all in all, a lot there, but really, really spectacular film. There are some parts of it that are a little in 2021, like a little like, that's not great, but I do think it still holds up.
Yeah, made a lot of great points there. I would piggyback on it, guys. It's also my number 5. This is my first introduction to Rosamund Pike. I think pretty much the world's introduction to her. I read the book late last year. Really amazing book. I think they perfectly cast Ben Affleck as Nick. I think he has that perfect mix of machismo, aloofness. I think there was that famous story about how he didn't want to put on a Yankees. Yeah, the baseball hat thing.
That's the funniest shit.
Perfectly personifies Nick of just like, I'll do this project, I'll do this movie. I'm not fucking wearing a baseball cap of a team I don't fucking like. Just fucking great movie. Great performances. Love Carrie Coon. My first introduction to her. Just all around great movie. Yep. So that was our code number 5. What is your number 4?
So my number 4, make sure I'm getting my list right in the right order here. Oh, get my app open. The Social Network. I really, people are like, oh, like this is one of those movies that I think people don't give Fincher enough credit for. I think a lot of the credit goes to Aaron Sorkin. Like obviously Aaron Sorkin is a incredibly talented screenwriter. But he's another one of those. It's kind of the opposite of Danny Boyle, where I think he is a screenwriter that I think gets elevated by his directors. I think probably my two favorite Sorkin movies are Social Network and Moneyball, with Bennett Miller.
Yeah.
So I do think that because Sorkin is a very famous screenwriter because his dialogue is very good. It's very punchy. It's very walk and talk. But I think it's when you have David Fincher, who is also very stylized and knows what he's doing, kind of to rein him back and kind of take that very stylized Fincher or the Sorkin-esque back and forth, these kind of like people, jabbing at each other verbally. When you have someone to kind of collaborate with and kind of like kind of mold it into something, it really works. It is kind of just a good story, but like normally I wouldn't. When I remember when it first came out, it was right when I was like, okay, David Fincher, this is like a guy. It was in 2010. And I was like, all right, so I'm going to see this movie that I would have no interest in about the creator of Facebook. Like, I would never see that, but I was like, oh, it's a David Fincher movie. I'll definitely watch this. And, I was blown away. It is because it's a movie about, greed and, how we treat other people and who we want in our lives and how we, Zuckerberg ends up just wanting more and more and more and how he pushes it away. And that last shot where he's just like clicking refresh after all this, he's just, of the girl who, shot him down at the end of the movie. Really, really great film.
Yeah. So this is my number 3, so I'll piggyback a little bit. I'm looking at the cast list, and it's some of these people I forgot were in it. Rashida Jones was in it for a little bit, I guess. And of course, Armie Hammer, which he's a mouthful right now, so we're not going to talk about him. Rooney Mara, I think, was the girl that you just mentioned that he was pining for. Yeah, this is one of those movies, Andrew Garfield. It's one of those movies that I really need to go back and revisit. A lot of people put this at the top of their list of best movies of 2010, even though it came out at the very, very beginning of it. Definitely one of those movies that, in hindsight of what happened in the 2016 election, I think you could make a, not remake or do something more with it as far as like the effects of social media have just exploded over the past decade. And I think it's a really great topic to revisit. I think what he did, again, a movie about this topic doesn't seem like a good movie would be made out of that. A movie about an early, I think Facebook was still very young at that point. I think it came out 2007, maybe 2006. So very young company. Yeah. Just incredible that they actually made one of the best movies of the decade out of that material. Yeah. So let me see. So that was my number 3. My number 4 is Fight Club. Talked a little bit about it already. Brad Pitt. I don't know if this is like peak. Would you say this is peak Brad Pitt? Is this his apex? Where would you put this on Brad Pitt's filmography?
It's not his best, but it's his most like iconic. It's his most like, this is like pure. It's the purest Brad Pitt. I'll say that.
Yes.
It's like if you could think of like what is Brad Pitt doing, like the most things that he's kind of known for. I would say that this is kind of the most that he's been better in other movies. But I think that this is what, if you're thinking of a Brad Pitt role, this is what you're thinking of.
Exactly. Let me ask you a question that I've asked my other coworker or co-host. Is Brad Pitt to you a supporting actor stuck in a leading man's body?
Ooh, that's a good question. No, I think he's a lead actor because there's definitely some people like that where they're so handsome that you kind of have to make them a lead. And I think like Jamie Bell is a character, is somebody like that who he's honestly one of the most underrated actors of our generation, and I think the reason is because he keeps getting put in these leading acting roles when he's a character actor and is much better in the supporting roles, and that's why whenever he's in a film by himself, his career hasn't really taken off. But I don't think that it's the same case really for Brad Pitt. I think Brad Pitt, I do think he does have that kind of leading man like charm and swagger, both kind of in his real life and just in the movies. He can really bring that. I think he is good when he is also part of an ensemble. Obviously, he's great in the Ocean's films. Talking about Soderbergh earlier.
Yep.
But yeah, I would say he's a leading man.
Yeah, it's weird. For me, like, what was it, 2 years ago with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, definitely he was, co-lead in that. I think, like you're saying before, I think Material definitely heightens a lot of movies. I think Material heightens him. I think it's just based on the script and how good it is and how good he delivers it, and it fit his sort of mannerism, speaking style, and just does it fit his Brad Pittness? It's got to be right for him. And I think you're correct, absolutely correct when you said it's the most Brad Pitt. It's the personification. It's the epitome of Brad Pitt. Like if you think about Brad Pitt, at that point or just in his career overall, Tyler Durden was everything that he was at that point. Exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
What was I going to say? Meatloaf was amazing in it. Still, I love that scene where he gets smushed into his shirt and you see his face on his shirt. Just this movie, like I said before, opened my eyes to, corporate culture, to a lot of this stuff that I'm still not really super familiar with. But yeah, just an incredible, time capsule of 1999, of this point in history where so much of the American economy was shifting from manufacturing and service related to, the corporate culture, of the office culture, of the cubicle, of you're just a guy, you're just a cog in the machine. You go to work every day, punch some numbers, and go home and watch some shitty TV. So yeah, one of the most perfectly attuned movies for that time.
Yeah, and I do think it also captures, we kind of were talking about like how it's just, 1999, there was all these kind of just movies about like dudes in cubicles, because I think that was like a decade when, we as like the US, as the, quote unquote the West or whatever, didn't have like an adversary. We had defeated the Soviet Union, and September 11th hadn't happened, and they hadn't, like George Bush hadn't started his war on terror. So we were just kind of like, kind of aimless. We didn't have anybody to defeat. We didn't have anybody to, kind of, that myth had disappeared of like that kind of American exceptionalism. So we just like, people were just like, well, what do we do now? How do we get, like, do we just kind of live our lives and we don't have to worry about the Russians anymore? Like, how do we continue? And I think that, this Fight Club, like they find like you have to like you go out and like punch somebody and like because there's no greater enemy, so it's just like hitting people in the face. I think it really captured that kind of feeling that was permeating with a lot of people.
Exactly. You nailed it. Let me just add one thing. David O. Russell, they were saying in the book, The Best Movie Year Ever, David O. Russell was at a meeting, some Hollywood meeting with George Bush, I think in late '99, and when George Bush shook David O. Russell's hand, he was in the middle of making Three Kings, and David O. Russell said, I'm making a movie about your father's legacy in Iraq, and George Bush was like, guess I have to go over there and finish the job. I was like, oh boy. Oh
man.
Jeez. So yeah, he did that indeed.
Yeah,
which wasn't great. Yep. So let me see. My number 3. I already talked about Social Network. That was my number 3. What is your number 3?
Yeah, my number 3 is, and this is a bit of an odd one, and I know it's not a lot one that people talk about really for Fincher, but I love The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
It's my number 2.
Oh, very awesome! That's great.
I love this movie.
I'm glad somebody out there enjoys it.
Yeah,
because this was the first movie. It wasn't my first Fincher movie. I'd obviously seen Fight Club and Seven before it, but it was my first movie where I was like, oh, this is this guy David Fincher, and then I kind of like put 2 and 2 together. That all 3 of these were from the same guy, but it is just like this kind of, and it is easily the most wholesome of his movies. It's not dark and depressing, and there is sad stuff that happens in it, but it doesn't feel like it's weighing on you as much as his other films. So it is very different than everything, but it is still a masterfully crafted movie. I think just talking about Brad Pitt, I think this is maybe Brad Pitt's best performance. Like he really just gives you the this guy's entire life, and you really feel for this character, and it's obviously, it's like, okay, we take a simple concept. It's based on a very short story by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which is the gimmick of a guy who ages backward. But it makes that into this whole interesting life story that's kind of like the story of the 20th century almost. And, they kind of changed the ending to end with Hurricane Katrina because after it had been written, that happened. So, and it was all set in Louisiana. So it ends there, and just kind of this romance that he has with Cate Blanchett, and they keep having all these near misses, like just they can never really get there over the years, and he kind of bumps into all these people along the way, and it did get a lot of comparisons to Forrest Gump because I believe it has the same screenwriter, but I think it is a much better version of that kind of like guy goes through the 20th century and experiences all these events than Forrest Gump. Not that I dislike Forrest Gump, I understand the criticisms of it though, and I don't feel any of those criticisms apply to Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which is just a phenomenal film that really does not get the credit that it deserves.
No, it really doesn't. You're correct, Eric Roth.
Sorry, one more thing. Before I forget. It's
yeah.
also the first Criterion Collection DVD I bought. Was Curious Case of
very
Benjamin
nice.
Button.
I didn't know it was. I didn't know it was out, so I'd definitely be putting that in the queue as soon as we're done here. The Eric Roth wrote Curious Case of Benjamin Button and Forrest Gump, and also another 1999 film, The Insider. So that's
okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So, yes, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. This is a stunningly beautiful film. The cinematography, the sets, the environment, stunningly shot. And then, of course, you have some of those beautiful people of all time, these genetically beautiful people, Cate Blanchett and Brad Pitt at their peak. You know, I said they're at their peak in 99, but, you know, the guy can have 2 peaks. That's fine.
He's like the Himalayas, many peaks.
Yeah, many peaks, exactly.
You've got Everest, we've got another mountain over here.
Exactly. Just gorgeous people in their prime, just being gorgeous. Really great supporting cast. Some of the first times I saw Taraji P. Henson and Mahershala Ali as their parents or caretakers, or whatever you want to call them. But yeah, just a stunningly gorgeous a love story. You know, a story about 2 people coming together. It has that moment where Cate Blanchett's character, you know, breaks her leg in a car accident. I love that nod to this idea of, you know, what if you just took 5 extra seconds to leave your house? Well, how different would your life be? I think it's a fascinating idea I think about a lot. Really, really great film. You know, it is one of those I feel like is a little long. It gets, you know, that the beginning is, you know, everything about World War I and the clock building. I think they maybe could have trimmed a little bit there, but overall, just like you said, really, really beautiful little film. Yeah, love this movie. So that was my number 2, and you said that was number 3.
That was my number 3. Yeah, so I think we're on your number 3 then.
My number 3 was Social Network.
Oh, right. Okay.
We talked about that. Talked about Curious Case of Benjamin Button. I think we're on your number 2.
All right, because so my number 2 is, and this is actually the only one that I went back and rewatched in preparation for this podcast. I would have, if I had time, watched everything, but only so many hours in a week. But I did really want to go back and rewatch this one, and it is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Nice.
I think that, you know, this does a lot of that kind of like Fincher, just dark, just, you know, ominous kind of like what's even happening, where you take something, and I haven't read the original book, but I do think, you know, it is kind of just, you know, one of those kind of like detective stories, but he does take it and just kind of like make this story that it's more or less a kind of like basic, like, oh, there's a murderer out there and, you know, what's going on and we've got to get to the bottom of it, and just makes it way more interesting because you really care about these characters. They really feel like authentic, interesting people, like that you are invested in their lives, and things are sticky, and, you know, he's got his whole thing with Robin's Wright character, and then, you know, and it was supposed to be, I'm really to this day just really sad that they didn't get to make the trilogy that they had planned, because it's just like a really brilliant film. The screenplay is amazing. And when he was, one of the things, you know, I could kind of mentioned earlier that Fincher does a good job of kind of like making an interestingly structured movie, and I think this is the epitome of that, because it's basically a 5-act structure, you know, because you do have the kind of like 3 acts, and then there is, you know, the climax where he finds out who the murderer had been, but it's actually, that's not really even solving the core mystery, because you still don't know who kidnapped Harriet, like, or who had killed Harriet, you know, allegedly. And, you know, you have, well, I always think of this line, the line from Stellan Skarsgård, where he's like, says something like to him, and he's like, oh, did you, he's like, what happened to Harriet? And he's like, you killed him. And he's like, you're a horrible fucking detective. And I always just think of that line. And so, you know, the climax happens, he blows up, it's the big action movie ending, and then you still have another act after that, where you get to you solve the mystery, and even after that, you still have the resolution of the characters' personal lives. You still have Elizabeth going and like finding out all the dirt on the guy who had sued him for libel, and, you know, you have her getting ready to go talk to him at the end, and she sees him back with Robin Wright, and she tosses this nice suit that he bought him in the trash. So he did at the time, you know, kind of not criticize, but like one thing he pointed out with the Marvel movies is that they're kind of like trapped in this 3-act structure that you kind of have to be a big Hollywood international success. You kind of have to, hit these beats in the specific order. I think he had a really good point with that. And, I'm glad, that's why I'm kind of glad that we're getting things like Loki and WandaVision that are, don't have to adhere to this 3-act structure now and can kind of be a little more interesting and follow all these different beats and tell things in a little bit of a different order. And I think that, Fincher has also, gone on to do like Mindhunter and stuff like that. And, before that, even House of Cards, where he is kind of like going into the miniseries TV realm because it does offer so many ways to kind of break down and do a less traditional narrative that I think he really did a great job of in this film.
Yeah, I don't have this on my top 5, unfortunately. I had to make some tough choices.
Yeah. There's gonna be like if people are listening, they're like, okay, he's at number 1. He's got one left, and there's still probably 2 or 3 movies, so it's not gonna make the cut. People are gonna be
there's quite
mad,
a few. There's quite a few, yeah. This is the one you rewatched it. I probably should have as well. This is probably the one I'm least familiar with the Fincher's films. Just looking at the cast list, though, Christopher Plummer had amazing, third act to his career. Love Stellan Skarsgård, Gordon Visnick. I remember from ER. Loved him on that show. I really need to revisit this again. I love Rooney Mara. Daniel Craig was, in the middle of his, in the early of his Bond run. I loved him then. And now still. But yeah, I definitely need to revisit this. But yeah.
Let me ask you a question real fast.
Yeah,
because it kind of relates to what you were saying about, Brad Pitt and being the leading man and stuff. I think that Daniel Craig is a lot better when he's not being Bond, when he's not being like the grizzled kind of like, whatever. When he's doing a role like this or something like Defiance, when he's kind of, I think he's a really good actor, but I don't like him as Bond. I don't know if you would agree with that at all.
I think it depends on the scripts. I think they've been very inconsistent with the scripts. I loved Casino Royale, loved Skyfall. They're great movies. I see what you're saying with him better as a supporting actor, but I do really enjoy those 2 Bond films that I said overall. Quantum of Solace, that suffered because of the writer's strike. Spectre was just this thing where they're like, let's make everything connected, and forgot what the guy's name is. The Blofeld.
Blofeld.
Blofeld did everything. He was the architect of his demise, or whatever he said. Just
Yeah, no. I was not.
I'm looking at Craig's IMDb. I really liked him in Munich. I really liked him in what was that movie? Layer Cake. He was really good in that. Yeah. So yeah, I can see what you mean with him being better as a supporting actor. But I think he's molded himself well to being Bond over the years. I can sort of see him and Brad Pitt in the same sort of categories, being sort of forced into the limelight because of their good looks. Yeah.
And before we completely move on, there's one more thing I want to say about Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And this applies to a lot of the films on this list, but how much of a master of special effects David Fincher is, and no one realizes it. Like, The Social Network has more FX shots in it than Godzilla 2014, which is insane. Like, like all the blood in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is all just fake, like the gummy bears and Gone Girl or CG. Like he uses he uses CG in ways that are not obvious. Like you don't ever notice it because he's like, such a meticulous filmmaker and he does so many shots and everything has to be kind of perfect. And it's just another tool in his toolbox. And a lot of people like to complain that like, oh, blah, 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 CG. But when you use it in a way like this, I mean, it really is effective and it's completely unnoticeable. And he'll even do small stuff like there's a scene in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo where Rooney Mara has a little part in her hair, and that was digitally altered throughout that whole scene to keep it consistent, so that her hairline isn't kind of shifting and stuff, so that you can be like, okay, this is all one continuous shot, or not continuous shot, but this is all whenever it comes back to her, it's all the same thing, even though it was filmed over like a course of weeks or whatever it was.
Yeah, that's incredible. Great point. I was watching a behind the scenes of how Parasite was made, and that background and a lot of those shots are massive, like CG backgrounds, and stuff in the foreground is also CG. I think it would blow people's minds to learn how much CG is in movies and TV these days.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Yeah.
So we are at number 1. Let me see how we have So we've talked about 4 of his movies so far, and there's about 5 others or 5 to 6 others that we could be going in. Why don't you tell me what your number 1 David Fincher film is?
All right, so my number 1 David Fincher film, and I'm sorry to everybody who had the posters on their walls of Fight Club and Seven, but it is Zodiac.
Yeah. Zodiac, yep, my number 1 as well.
Excellent, excellent. Oh man, I'm glad to hear that because Zodiac is such an underrated film. You know, like
it is.
Speaking about, you know, just kind of piggybacking on what we were just saying about the special effects. He basically recreated San Francisco in the 1970s and early 80s, just digitally. You know, there'll be whole scenes where Mark Ruffalo is like on a street and the whole street is recreated. The skyline, the freeway that collapsed with the earthquake is recreated. That's all great. But of course, what really, really makes this movie is just it's a twisting mystery and you're never really sure like what's going on and you kind of second guess yourself and you really are just in Robert Graysmith, you know, the character played by Jake Gyllenhaal. You're in his mind and you start to become obsessed with it just like he is, and you see one by one everybody in the film who just kind of they lose interest and they move on with their lives and he just becomes obsessed. And it doesn't have like a big Hollywood style ending. It doesn't even have the ending of Dragon Tattoo where she's chasing him down and the car explodes. It just kind of was like, and then they caught him. This guy was probably it. Maybe not. I don't know. The DNA says probably. And it just kind of was like very true to life. I think it is his most underrated film. Maybe one of the most underrated movies. Like I know it did not do well at the box office. But it's one of my all-time favorite films. It's part of the reason why I think maybe one of the few years that is better than 1999 is 2007. Because I could do a whole thing about how insane 2007 was.
Yes,
but this movie, it's just a perfect film. Great performances across the board. You look at the cast, an incredible cast. You know, you've of course got Ruffalo, and you've got Jake Gyllenhaal. You've got all these great supporting actors like Elias Koteas and I forget his name. He's the bald guy, Drew Carey's brother. You know who? But yeah, it's
John Carroll Lynch.
Was that?
John Carroll Lynch.
Thank you, John Carroll Lynch.
Yeah.
But just, and then, you know, there's so many more people that I'm not even mentioning.
So many.
But
so many.
the plot just really grabs you, and you care so much. It looks amazing, and just all in all, what a film should be. One of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said. That scene in. Did you mention the scene in the basement where
I didn't even mention that's such a great. It's so unnerving.
Unnerving, and that guy is actually played by the guy that does the voice for Roger Rabbit. I don't have his name right here, but that was interesting, a little tidbit. But yeah, just so unnerving, and so it fills you with dread. And there's really nothing, like you said, nothing really comes of it. Like he's not a killer. He has nothing to do with the killing, right? It was just a weird dude with a weird basement. Talking about the supporting cast: Philip Baker Hall. You got Donald Logue, Dermot Mulroney, John Gates, Chloe Sevigny, John Carroll Lynch, Brian Cox, Robert Downey Jr. right before his comeback with Iron Man. This is around the same time as Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. I love Anthony Edwards in ER. Interesting seeing him in that role. I think he did actually pull it off. Mark Ruffalo, Jake Gyllenhaal. Yeah, just an incredibly made movie. Again, his movies are, they go 2.5 hours, almost 3 hours, but they move. They move so swiftly. I would absolutely rewatch this anytime, any day that it was on. We watched this with my co-host. We did a little movie cage match episodes for a while, and we put this against Nightcrawler. Which Jake Gyllenhaal was also in, so that was an interesting comparison there. But yeah, Zodiac is again, one of the best movies of all time. I would probably put this in my top 20 list of favorite movies of all time. It is incredible, just incredibly made. Yes, absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. And just going to the list that you mentioned, 2007 as being a great year. I'm not going to rattle off like I did the 1999 list, but you have Atonement, American Gangster, Eastern Promises, Juno. Then of course the big ones: No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood, Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford, which I just caught up with just recently last year, I believe. Ocean's 13. Oh, that was the thing about 2007, dude. Think about how many number threes there were. Ocean's 13, The Bourne Ultimatum,
Spider-Man
there were
3.
so many. Spider-Man 3, Shrek the Third. There were so many number threes of that year for some reason.
Yeah.
It was so bizarre. I wrote them down. Let me see if I have them in my notes still. Unfortunately, I don't. But yeah, just incredible year. Incredible year. Probably
Yeah,
1999.
and one more I got to throw out there is it's one of
Yeah.
my favorite films of all time, and one we kind of briefly touched on in the last time we did a podcast, Stardust. Stardust, incredible
Stardust.
film.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, that was our number 5. Let me go through to my top 5, and then I'll talk a little bit about my bottom 5. Gone Girl, number 5. Fight Club, number 4. Social Network, number 3. Curious Case of Benjamin Button, number 2. Zodiac, number 1. What was your top 5?
Yeah, my top 5 were it was pretty similar. Gone Girl, number 5. Social Network, number 4. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, number 3. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, number 2, and number 1, Zodiac.
Zodiac. So. Bottom 5, very tough. I mean, not so tough with the very bottom, but 3 at the bottom. Panic Room, I haven't revisited in a very long time, so that's my number 10. Mank, I put in number 9. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, number 8. And one of the most mind-blowing movies I've ever seen, I saw this recently, The Game. Dude, that ending, like, what the fuck? I had to watch it like 3 times to understand what the fuck was going on.
So I
like,
still haven't seen The Game and Panic Room. Those are the only 2 Fincher films I haven't seen, and I was almost going to watch them for this episode, but I was like, you know what? They're not going to crack the top 5. Like, they could be incredible, but those 5 are just so good that I'm like, okay.
I won't spoil it for you, but my God, dude, that is just what the fuck? Like, the ending is just like that happened, and then that happened, like within the span of like 10 minutes or 5 minutes, even. Just like, wait,
I've heard a lot of really great things about The Game. Like, I've had people recommend me. They're like, it's very underrated. You need to talk about it on your show. Like, so it's always been one that I need to watch, and probably will after talking about this.
Yeah. And then number 6 just barely did not make the top 5 with 7. 7 is just 7. It's just fucking 7. Did you make any honorable mentions? Did you rank the rest of them or no?
I mean, honestly, yeah, not really. I think that of the other ones because I like I mentioned, I hadn't seen Game and Panic Room. But we talked a lot about both Seven and Fight Club. I think those are both really good movies. Mank is also a very solid film. It felt like Fincher kind of just being like, this is what you guys want to see from me. This will get me an Academy Award. Like, it's a movie about old Hollywood. It's about Citizen Kane, and Mank is good.
Yes.
And then I actually do like Alien 3 because I think it's not a great film. It's I would say it's of those 11 films, or of the 9 that I've seen, it's at the bottom of the list. But I appreciate it a lot because it is this movie that is so clearly hamstrung by a studio that is just has no idea what they're doing, and they're doing all these rewrites while shooting is happening. And you can, like, if you know all the behind scenes stuff, you understand why Fincher really doesn't like studios. And but it does have like an actual like interesting ending to Ripley's arc over these 3 films. Of course, she got resurrected in the next film. But, I do think that there is some really good stuff in there. Like, I remember I was watching it, and there was that scene where the warden is like, I knew there is no alien here, and you will all be in line, and there's going to be no more talk about it. And then he just gets snatched up by and he's holding this red ball the whole time. You just see him get snatched up, and then there's a beat, there's a pause, and then all of a sudden just the ball just boop, 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 drops and rolls on. I'm like, that's such a Fincher thing to do. Like, I just so it's a movie like that will always be more interesting than Alien 4 to me, which is, like a movie that is like an admirable failure where you can see all the merit, and for whatever reason it just didn't work out. Then a movie of like, we'll just make it. It'll just be a fun alien movie. Oh, cool. Like, the aliens are swimming. Like, I would much rather watch an Alien 3 than an Alien Resurrection any day.
Yeah. I haven't seen either of them in a long time. I'm more familiar with Alien Resurrection. That movie has moments, and also it's directed by Jean-Pierre Jeudet, who did City of Lost Children. So it has that, again, very Finchery, like just grimy, gritty, wet feel to it. Like, that movie is just wet everywhere, and
everybody's
of course
sweating.
Everyone's sweating. That famous shot of her doing the backwards, basket into the she shoots the ball into a basket backwards, and what's his name?
Ron Perlman. He almost ruined the shot.
What the fuck? He almost ruined the shot. So yeah, it's got Holt McNally from Fight Club. That's interesting. Didn't know that. Oh no, I'm sorry. I was talking about Alien 3. It's got Holt McNally. He's in a bunch of his stuff, I guess.
Have you heard the thing where it's like all the 4 original Alien films are all different genres? The first one is like a horror movie. The second one is an action film. The third one is a thriller, and the fourth one's a comedy.
A comedy, really? Interesting.
Like just because it's kind of like an unintentional comedy because it's kind of like slapstick and stuff like that. And Ripley's doing the behind back shot thing. It's so.
Dude, the cast list is insane. It's got Brad Dourif. I always forget how to say his name because it sounds like Brad. So I'm saying
he's
Brad
being
Dourif.
real creep. Like he's peak Brad Dourif in that movie. We're talking about peak actors. He is just very much just like the aliens. Yes.
Leland Orser. Oh, that was the guy I was trying to think of from Seven, who does fucks the woman to death. Yeah, he's in Alien Resurrection. It's always interesting who they cast for the robot part, right? Wasn't it? And then later on in the Prometheus movies, you have
Fassbender.
Michael Fassbender. He's playing Michael Fassbender across from himself in Coven. He's like, David plays the fingers. And
I'll do the fingers. Oh my god.
But yeah, okay, so that'll do it for our top 5 David Fincher films. Tell the people where they can find you on the internet.
Yeah, so you guys can listen to my podcast. It's called Underrated. You can listen to it on, however you're listening to this podcast, listen to it there or on YouTube, so Spotify, iTunes, or Apple Podcasts, all Google Podcasts, all that good stuff. So you can find us on our Instagram at Undercast Company, or you can find me just at Derick's Photos there. We talk about, obviously just underrated movies. We've talked about Zodiac because obviously I think that's a very underrated film. So if you guys like underrated movies, check us out there, Underrated.
All right, man. Thanks so much for coming back on. It was a freaking blast.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. This was really fun. I really enjoyed talking about all these Fincher films.
Yeah, me as well. So that'll do it for Can I Say Something? I've been Damien, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. All right. So that was a freaking blast.
That was great, yeah.